o'clock. So, seems like most of the folks are present that we're expecting. I'd like to welcome everyone to May 21st Budget Committee meeting session to work on the FY21 budget. Like most of the folks, if you would just join me in prayer as we open the meeting. Father, just thank you for all your many blessings, the opportunity to live in a phenomenal place here in Washington County.
I'm on this budget committee, but I'll walk out there. Just come on down here and I'll tell the guard.
Thank you. Just thank you for steering us through this virus situation with little physical impact to many people. I ask that you, as we reopen, that you would just protect us, keep us safe, and bring our economy back. I just ask for the blessings on these men and women today as they deliberate business of Washington County. They do it with discernment and wisdom. Father, we ask all these things in your Son's precious name. All right. So the first thing that we will do is take a look at the agenda, and if you would please do that. You have in front of you to review that the items on this agenda are essential business to the county because they are a critical part of the ongoing work of the budget process. So is there a motion to approve this as essential business?
So moved.
Proper motion from Commissioner Malone. Thank you. And a second?
Second.
That would be a second from Commissioner Wheeler? Or who?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wheeler. All right, so we do have are there any, all those in favor of calling this a critical, essential piece of business and approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? All right. The agenda is approved, and we will begin to move forward. The first item of consideration this morning is a presentation and reception of the budget from the Washington County Board of Education. That Mr. Hale or Dr. Flannery?
Good morning. On Tuesday of this week, the Board of Education adopted a balanced budget. The documents should be available digitally there if Mr. Meredith can wave the magic wand. And we request that the committee create a resolution and pass this forward to the full commission at your earliest convenience. For details, please refer to my trusted companion, Brad Hale.
So it looks like what Mr. Meredith has up is the detailed budget for the general fund. There is one, Mitch, that is the narrative that kind of summarizes the budget. I would probably start there unless there's any questions. You're looking at the revenue, the second page of the main budget, which has the revenue totals. But
which file do you want to throw up there, Brad?
The one that says budget narrative. That will give the summary. There should have been three files, or there were three files sent on the general budget, one file sent on dietary. And
I got it. It was at the bottom of the screen. Sorry.
Okay.
Just a second.
There should have been one for the dietary, one for federal projects, and then three for the general budget, three documents there.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, this really summarizes all the pages of the documents. So what the Board of Education has brought to us today is proposed 1% pay raise for all employees, and that would be general and federal fund employees. The total estimated expenses is at the top right of this budget at $74,123,304. The next section that you've seen before is just the three main sources of revenue. And you can see with the property tax and sales tax estimate, those numbers are identical to the FY20 budget at the previous direction of the county. So no increase there. The BEP estimate for May we did get, it is still holding at a $1,385,000 increase from the prior year in actual dollar amount total. So all revenue sources for the general budget come to $70,682,370. So what the Board of Education has agreed to do this time, or voted to do, is we have about an $8 million fund balance per last year's audit. There certainly is still some moving parts in this year with the effects of COVID, but based on current tracking, there should be a very strong chance that we'll at least hold that $8 million. We have had to absorb some major expenses that were unplanned, but based on current tracking, we should hold that $8 million. Worst case scenario, we don't know what June sales tax is going to show. Of course, June's numbers will be for April, but I'm calculating the worst case scenario. We still should be close, 7.5 being a worst case scenario, depending on if sales tax really hurts us in June with the June numbers, but 7.5 to 8. So the money will be there for the budgeted pull from fund balance if necessary for FY21. The board has $3,440,000. There are several one-time funding items that are included that they wanted to do in this budget. And we did have some additional revenue that came in over the past year that was unplanned. So some of that revenue, it'll all go into the fund balance, which will help offset that $3.4 million pull from fund balance if necessary for FY21. But that is bringing you a general fund budget where no additional funds are being requested from the county. The exact same revenue projections are in place as of the county for FY20. So no additional funds requested, and that's really the summary of the overall numbers on the general fund. There's some extra items detailed there. The 1% raise actually costs the system, the first two lines, about $838,000 plus an additional $80,000 approximately in retirement contributions. So to give our system a 1% raise, you can see it's about $928,000. We have over around 1,200 employees that this would affect. So, and then we have been told by the state insurance to anticipate a 5% increase in our health insurance. That's where you'll see the $377,000 on the next item. And those items are in that section are just must-haves. They're going to occur regardless. So, and then the bottom section of that summary are additional items that are just needed and that the board decided to move forward with this year. You can see textbooks is badly needed, and it's the major part of that additional 1.146. And you can see at the bottom, CTE, the board is investing in CTE, the CTE program this year. Those bottom three items, that $250 being additional program funding for equipment and just various sources that'll really increase the capability of that program for students and have them much better prepared when they leave high school. But that overall is the summary. I guess the takeaway is no additional funding requested from the county. The budgeted pull from fund balance is going to be there for 1 year. Certainly, I've advised the board against future years of that high of an amount, but for FY21, that's pretty solid numbers. So certainly, any questions you have, we can go to other documents if there's any detailed questions or anything from me or Dr. Flannery. We'll be happy to try to answer that.
I think from the budget committee's perspective, this is a big number in our budget, and it's a very sizable increase. I would think that the committee would like to have this and study it and maybe consider it at the June 5th meeting for approval. Are there any any thoughts from the committee with respect to any specifics in here that we've seen so far that we need for them to work on?
I might just have one question, if I may. And first, thanks to both Dr. Flannery and Mr. Hill for their work in bringing a balanced budget, I guess. It is a big number. And I like the way Brad put it about, this transfer from the reserve funds if needed. I'm curious, thinking about the current budget year. I know last year there was a transfer coming from the reserve funds from the general fund, if you will. What was that budgeted number versus what you've actually had to cover from the reserve funds this year?
So that number won't be fully known until after June 30th.
Right,
but
understood. But I'm just thinking year to date.
The budgeted number, or right now we haven't had to dip into that because our average expenses are about $5.5 million plus a month. So Mitch, if you can go back to the main budget page, the detailed page, we can show Mr. Malone that exact number. We'll go to page 2 of the detailed document, the 9-page document on Excel.
Okay.
And it's right around 1.8 million though, Mr. Malone, was the budgeted pool. So now you see in June, that's our largest expense month from an accounting perspective. Also something called deferred teacher payroll. We have basically 3 pay periods for accounting purposes that hit the books in June. So you're talking about, instead of $5.5 million on average, that jumps to about $11 or $12 million expense month. So we won't know until June exactly. Now, based on current trends, the unknown being the sales tax number that will come in June for April's numbers. We just don't have a benchmark to really know how bad that's going to hit us. So, that's a moving target. But as of right now, the projection is we'll hold that $8 million fund balance. So the reason I threw a number out there of 7.5 to 8, worst case scenario, is the sales tax roughly should be around 1.2 million in June roughly. So if that number's hit by $500,000, I can't imagine it'd be worse than that. But let's say it is. But there's not a benchmark to go by. That's where I'm saying 7.5 to 8. So Mitch, if you'll go down to the second page, you're on page 1. And so the number, if we go to the center of that, Mr. Malone, it'll say 2019-2020 budget amendment number 1. And 1.785 million is the budgeted pull from fund balance that's in the budget approved by the county commission.
Thank you. I think the positive, just in my mind, is that that's the amount that was budgeted, but at least up to now, you've not had to actually pull any of that. Now, I understand things could change in June as a heavy expense month, but thanks for sharing the numbers. I think it is a positive, and clearly you've had some revenues, I guess, over the course of the year that have helped keep you from having to dip into that.
Yeah, I have. I can list those. It's roughly about 700,000 in additional revenues that we didn't have budgeted, that we didn't know were coming, that have showed up. One of that being an E-rate court settlement that had went on for years that we got a piece of, and that was nearly 300,000, and that's going to offset some of the cost of the textbooks actually. And we have some BEP growth funds where we had an increase in enrollment this year. We have not got that since I've been in this job, but that's to the tune of about 222,000. That combined with the E-rate, totals around $519,000. And so that was new money into the fund balance we didn't have budgeted and was going to really offset that large expense of textbooks, is what the board was thinking there.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Other questions or comments?
I would just echo what Commissioner Malone said, thanking the school board and Brad and Dr. Flannery for the work. I know that was not easy, and we appreciate what you've done.
Okay, we'll take this, I guess. Are you all comfortable with taking this under consideration for the next week or two, and then getting back to them on June 5th with recommendation? Okay. Brad, I appreciate your work, and Dr. Flannery on this. I'll say that it $3.5 million out of the fund balance is a big number. The general budget increase at almost right at 5% is a big increase. That gives me concern, particularly in some uncertain times. While it's clear that, at least relatively clear, I think to me at this point, that you will well cover it this year without any problem. If in fact those funds are needed to be removed from the fund balance, then that takes you down to a point where you will not be able to do that again next year, and hence will be faced with significant reduction. And a lot of these increases in that $3.4 million are recurring expenses. Some are not, but there are a lot of them that are. So I just, will say right now that you need to put on notice that there's a possibility, if you need to actually use these monies out of your reserve, that you'll be looking at significant cuts next year, which generally are very difficult. We almost always start with last year's budget and move upward. At least that all the time that I've experienced this with the Board of Education, that's been the case. I don't remember when you go backwards. And so I just throw this out to our group to consider as we move forward approving this on June 5th. There are liabilities here, and there may be some very difficult decisions next year or the year after. So, all right. Thank you for indulging me that power rate.
You may want to, as part of the school package, you also have to adopt their food service budget. The federal projects, which Brad had sent and we forwarded to you all, will be, we don't actually take action on those specific federal project numbers. What the commission does is approve that the federal project numbers, revenues and expense budgets are those that are approved by the Tennessee Department of Education. We have very little control, or actually no control. You have no control really over, what federal project revenue they receive and how it's spent. So we've got up on the screen the nutrition budget. So I don't know if any commissioners have any questions on that, or if Brad wants to point out anything.
Sure. Yeah. And first, Mayor Grandy, I can assure you the words you just said on the general fund budget, they were almost word for word with what I relayed to the board on that being unsustainable on the fund balance pool. Mr. Meredith was there and probably verify that was nearly word for word of what I'd said. So I certainly am with you on that.
Thank you, sir.
On the what you're looking at now is the diet fund balance, or the dietary budget. It's a little over $3 million. It's funded by payments from breakfast and lunch, and then federal assistance for the students that qualify. So this does not request or no requirement from money from the county. The board did approve the far right column that says 5% plus steps. So, and this was the second piece, really a second step from last year in trying to align the dietary payroll in line with other systems. So that 5% is a 5% adjustment to the pay scales for the dietary department. You can see the revenue is coming in just over 3.2, which is basically a break even on the expense side of a positive of a little over 50,000. So this is again, no money is requested from the county, so about $529 to the positive. So that's basically a break even projection for the next fiscal year on dietary, but pretty straightforward with that. But it still requires commission approval.
What we had said at the last meeting is that we would approve this at the same time we approve the general fund budget for the school system. Is that still the desire of the committee?
I think so.
Okay. All right, thanks. Anything else around the federal money?
Other than Mitch covered it, in the past, it's just it is as the Tennessee Department of Education allocates. And for the commissioners that aren't real familiar with the federal projects, those grants change. The allocations can change monthly sometimes, and some of the grants are not even allocated yet that will be allocated. So it's strictly whatever's allocated from the state is what we budget to spend. And there is one other thing I'd probably like to mention, Mayor Grandy, back to the general budget that I didn't mention earlier, is there is an electric bus expense as part of that increase, but it's funding neutral because about half of that, it's about $430,000 specific. It's in the transportation category, but that's another one-time expense that wasn't really pointed out on that summary sheet. Just because it's funding neutral. We've already had a donation from Bright Ridge and TVA totaling $130,000. We have $75,000 in the fund balance from a total bus from last year we were going to put towards that. So that's over $200,000. And then a grant potential that'll pay up to 50% is another $219,000 from the TDEC. So that is part of that expense increase to the tune of about $430,000. Embedded in that general fund budget that's one time, but we have funding for it 100%.
And so Bright Ridge's funding has already been received, and so does TVA's. The grant funding, I guess, will come out on the backside. So, yeah, some of the revenue. Do we recognize that revenue in this fiscal year, or
not on the grant because we haven't received it yet? We've got a contract on it, but the revenue from the actual grant from TDC won't be recognized until we actually get it. So it's not in the fund balance or in the revenue totals. Gotcha. Well, it's in the projected revenue totals. But.
Trying to get those Canadians to build that bus.
Yeah.
All right.
No problem, Joe. It's in Canada.
Any other questions with respect to any of the school budget items presented?
So we'll be an agenda item at the committee's meeting on June the 5th. And then with any luck at all, we'll be in front of the full commission at their meeting in June.
That would be the plan, sir.
That would be the plan. And we can start spending our $74 million on July the 1st. With any luck at all.
That's right.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you for your indulgence. And you have our assurance that we will continue with our frugal ways that have created this $8 million fund balance.
Dr. Flannery and Brad, Mayor, I'm going to remind them or let them know that on May 28th, we do have a county commission workshop to review all the budgets, which will include which would include the school's budget. So you may want to put that on your calendar. It's at 5 p.m. on May the 28th.
Will we be joining by Zoom like this, Mitch?
I think the mayor can speak to that, but I think that's the current plan.
It is the current plan. All right. Let's see. So moving on into county budget work. I think the first thing maybe we'll shoot for is take a look at these capital projects one more time and see if we might get the committee to give them a vote of approval to move forward to the full commission. I think, Mitch, do we have the version where we've split off the education capital projects from the general government capital project? Is that?
We did.
Oh yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Spring.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, as you all hopefully have had some chance to review after our last meeting, we went ahead and separated those two projects between a general government capital projects fund, which is 171, in the Education Capital Projects Fund, which is 177. And you can see the impact or the projection of for FY 6/30/21 as to the operations of those. I'll scroll on down to the general government plan, which is this one. And what this contemplates is 3 pennies of property tax revenue, which also encompasses, some grant revenue. That's our other revenue line. Grant revenue, collection of prior year taxes, investment income on the fund balance. So you can see the projected revenues for 2021 through 2025. I did add this trustee commission line under the capital projects encumbrance projection. Before that was actually netted out of the revenue, which made really a reconciliation between the capital projects plan, which you have in front of you, and the actual budget a little more difficult. So I've just separated that out to show it as basically an expense of the fund, which it is. You can see the items listed, which I think we discussed last time we reviewed this. Really hasn't been any changes to the general government usage. So I guess what I'd do at this point is ask if you have any questions or comments on the general government side, and if not, I'll jump over to education, and then we can look at the rest, talk about all of it in total. Anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. All right. So on the education side, and as you'll recall, let me back up here. Part of when we separate this out, and I don't remember if and this probably would be good information for Dr. Flannery and Brad. I don't know that they were with us last time we reviewed this schedule, but what we've done is we've gone through, and from the inception of the Capital Projects Fund, we've captured all the revenues that were received or recognized, and have split those between if you will, the intent of where those pennies go. One of the challenges has been, we initially started off with this Capital Projects Fund with 32 pennies. Okay. And at the time, it seemed like a really good idea to keep it all together in one spot. But over the last 4 years, I think, I know I have, and I would submit that those on the school board have had concerns about where the pennies were going. And as I've said before, the pennies were never officially designated. So many pennies go to schools, so many pennies go to general government. And so it's created a little bit of angst, if you will, as to whether somebody's using somebody else's pennies. And so, probably going forward, definitely it would eliminate that by splitting this fund into 2 pieces. And so to be equitable or fair, we really needed to go back and look, okay, so how have all these pennies been spent since we started this process? What was intended for education, what was intended for general government, how does all that filter down, and where are we today? Because, the pennies have changed. We've had to move pennies to debt service. We've had a reappraisal. We've had to readjust pennies. So this schedule presents in actual dollars the impact of the last 4 years. And so as you walk down through it, we had $39 million available for education purposes, we've had 23, almost 24 million available for other general government purposes. But then we've spent $40 million for education and 14 million for general government. This gives us where our relative fund balances would be had we had two separate funds. And as you can see, we have spent about $1.6 million on education more than what we've collected. We've received 8.9 million more than what we've spent on general government. So when you net those, that gives us a fund balance, if you would, of a total of about 7.3 million. These two numbers, you can't, when we split this off, okay, when we create two funds, one for education and one for general government, you can't start the fund off, you can't start the education fund off with a $1.6 million deficit in their fund balance. So in order to fix that, what this model proposes is actually taking 2 pennies. As you can see right now, we're at 19 pennies for school and 1 penny for general government. What this model proposes, when you get down, let me jump down here to the education piece, or excuse me, to the general government piece. What this model proposes is using 3 pennies. That is, for general government, we'll allocate 3 pennies as a property tax. Well, we had 1, so where'd the other 2 came from? Well, those 2 came from the education side. They had 19, now they have 17. So 2 pennies is equivalent to about $650,000 a year, right? So the idea, and I've got it in here for years past that, but the idea was, and of course there'll be a new commission in 2023, and they may choose to do something different, but at least for the next 2 years, we'd take those 2 pennies, which would be, about $1.2 million in total, a little more, maybe $1.3 million in total of revenue that would have heretofore gone into the General Capital Projects Fund that would have been, quote, earmarked for education, but we are actually going to leave those pennies sitting in the General Government Capital Projects Fund. Up here, as you can see, we had a net $7.3 million of fund balance. All right, that's our beginning number for our fund balance projections. And of course, we've got 0 for the education capital projects. All right. We looked at the general government projects, the projected revenues, and as you can see, the fund balance, okay, the projected fund balance next year, if we do all these projects and revenues materialize as they should, we're going to have a shortfall. So in FY22, as we go through this budget process next year, of course, we'll be a year closer. And my guess is that we'll figure out a way to plug that $500,000 hole at that time, either by figuring out some revenue enhancements or expenditure reductions. So getting to what probably is more important to Dr. Flannery and Mr. Hale, if we look at our educational capital projects, well, let me jump down to the bottom. We do end up with with some issues. We're going to have a little bit more of a problem next year in FY21. As you can see, we're looking at close to $1 million deficit. Should we do all this work that the schools have planned for the Boone HVAC, the Crockett HVAC work? This does not, and keep in mind though, this does not consider expense deferral, or not expense, actually revenue enhancement from if the Board of Education were to finally settle on an energy services project. A lot of these costs, that you see here for Boone, the Boone HVAC and controls and the Crockett HVAC and controls are currently being considered by 3 or 4 companies in terms of coming back with a plan to pay for that cost through energy savings, reductions in energy cost. But you can see that what we've got planned in FY21, as we drop down through here, is of course the completion of the Boone roof. And, following up on the question that was asked last time, we had $400,000, I believe, budgeted for the gym roof that we're doing. And if memory serves me correct, we were about 50 or 60% of that number in actual bid cost.
That's correct.
So, I'm crossing my fingers that we have the same effect when we get ready to do the rest of the facility. You can see our normal technology, the smart boards, tablets. I think I think the school's pretty much completed its audio enhancement work. There may be some classrooms that still don't have it. And I'll let you can see what the
Brenda
on there. And
joined the meeting.
If Dr. Flannery or Brad want to comment on this, it's probably be a good time to do that.
Well, I'm wondering if you have any questions. I mean, we don't have any intention of putting audio enhancement in every classroom in the school system. It's not necessary. Do I see $456,000 for school buses and $640,000 for technology in FY21 that will be available?
You do.
Okay. I would say that completion of that Boone roof would be our number one needed project. We can limp along on the HVAC if we have to. And we will have a proposal for the gray brick repair project in front of the board, hopefully within 30 to 60 days. And I suspect $300,000 will be laughably low by the time we see the final estimate. So there's that.
So generally questions, does it make sense, I guess, to the committee to look at it like this and to actually take the 20 pennies that have been sort of assigned to the capital projects commitment for the county, to separate them in these two ways? Do you think that makes more sense?
I think it's a really good idea, but I would ask the question, how are we making it clear that this is subject to change and this is not that these pennies are assigned to one or the other?
Well, right. So this is a plan. This is a budget. It's subject to review every single year. The key, I think, there is that there are capital projects across the county government, schools, and general government, whether it's detention center, HVAC projects, or roofs, or other things that will require this amount of funding in the foreseeable future.
Well, and I think we all know that. What I'm getting at, though, is, and everybody probably across the board understands that things along the expenditures are going to change. But it's pretty clear that that has not been the understanding of some with respect to the allocation of the pennies to education versus general. Well,
Commissioner Wheeler, I do think it's a year-by-year decision that the Board of Commissioners would make, because those pennies will be specifically laid out in the tax levy resolution. So, right now we have 20 pennies going to general capital project. Well, in the tax levy resolution, that'll be 3 and then 17 for education. Now, if in a subsequent year you decide to change those.
But I mean, we all know that you're preaching to the choir. What I'm getting at is how do we communicate to the congregation that may change? And, you know, even if it's just a notation where we have property pennies in quote or in a parenthetical that we say, you know, subject to change each year, it's something, because we're not getting the message out to the congregation that this is subject to change. I mean, you know, that's why we get these are my pennies. This is, you know, what are you doing with our education pennies? Where'd those pennies go? That type thing, because we're not getting it communicated. You know, we get it here. Both of you were explaining to me how this works. We get that, but there are others outside, and particularly beyond even the school board, that feel like we're taking something that we're really not taking anything from anybody. We're just reallocating, which is the purpose of the thing to begin with. If we could make some sort of notation on here that reflects that, I think it would be helpful to be able to point back to when those questions come up, when somebody just doesn't understand how it works.
I think that's really great commentary, and so noted. Maybe we'll try to craft something around that for the workshop, and we'll see how it is received there. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea, and I'm not saying we can't go ahead and approve it. I just think that's a footnote or a comment somewhere on here, but it doesn't necessarily change the plan. I mean, it's a good plan, and I think it's a great idea to split it. Mr. Meredith, I thought that was a really good idea.
Other thoughts or comments?
No, I think the plan makes sense. And certainly in some ways makes it easier to see when you separate it out, especially in terms of what's planned, not just in the current year, but in years to come. So I think it's fine. And I think the notation about, you know, that was referenced is a good idea. Just anything we can do to say, hey, this is the plan, but the plan can change as situations and other needs arise.
Yeah, of course, once we get out into 22 or 23, when we begin to allocate funds for the contractual relationship with the Jonesboro school project, then you know, we might even take a look at creating an education fund for that project specifically, because once we get into that, you really cannot reverse, really can't reverse that allocation, to the Jonesboro project. But, you know, we can cross that bridge when we get there.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
If I may ask a question, and I may show my ignorance here, of that $6,047,000, how much of that has to be earmarked for a retirement of debt, if any?
You're right.
There is.
Or is that all money that will be available for various projects this year?
Could you, Dr. Flannery, could you repeat that?
Yes, of the six, it says that there'll be $6,447,965 available for education capital projects in this fiscal year, FY21. And I'm wondering if any of that has to go toward debt retirement, or if all of it is available to be spent.
That is all available for current spend. Money that was necessary for prior debt retirement has already been allocated over to debt service.
That answers my question. Thank you.
And I will kind of piggyback on that, on the mayor's comment, and the jury's out on this, and we've had limited discussion with our auditors on it, but how do we account for the lease arrangement once it's in place on the new Jonesboro school? there has been some discussion that may actually end up being reflected as debt on the county's books. And if so, then we would probably, we would consider moving that obligation to debt service and the pennies along with it to a debt service fund or a separate school debt service fund to keep those pennies out of the capital maintenance, to maintain that difference between capital maintenance, which is what this fund is for, capital maintenance in new projects, not for service and debt. So,
Well, that's good news. Thank you.
so, but it would, it would require the movement of, pennies equivalent to $2.6 million to do that. So,
Yeah. That's welcome news.
Other questions or comments concerning these capital funds? We could, if the committee would like to do that, go ahead. If you feel comfortable with where we are with this now, go ahead and approve the capital project proposal to move forward to the full commission. And just sort of check that box if you want to, or we can leave it for consideration at another time. Just leave that up to the committee. If someone wants to make a motion, great. If not, we'll just move to the next item.
With the idea that we need to start making some progress forward, I guess I will make the motion that we approve the plan for the capital projects budget.
Second.
Right. So we have a proper motion by Commissioner Malone to accept the capital projects or to approve the capital projects proposal and move to the full commission. Second by Commissioner Wheeler. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. Actually, before we vote on this, my bad. Meeting management protocol here indicated that we did not initially take a roll of our members. So I would first ask that we just do that so we know who all is exactly present. Sherry, can you call the roll?
Yes. Mayor Grandy?
Here.
Commissioner Wheeler?
Here.
Commissioner Malone?
Here.
Commissioner England?
here.
And Commissioner Light. Have 4 present and Commissioner Light absent.
Okay, that will declare a quorum so we can now actually approve items. And if you would call that roll one more time on the motion.
Okay. Commissioner Wheeler?
Yes.
Mayor Grandy?
Yes.
Commissioner Malone?
Yes.
And Commissioner England?
Yes.
Have 4 yes, 1 absent.
Okay, so we have approval to move the capital projects forward to the full commission. Thank you, committee. Let's see, next item for consideration maybe is our highway fund.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, can I confirm with that vote that was intended to be placed on your full budget? That's not an independent resolution. Am I correct?
It'll be part of the budget. Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alex, the budget resolution won't come until really after the public hearing and when the commission or when the committee makes their final recommendation, if you will, to the full commission.
Yes, we have it drafted, but I'm just making sure that the business that's being conducted today and these votes are to take these items on to your full budget. They're not independent resolution items, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mitch.
Okay, on to the highway. I don't see Johnny on board with us today. He's joined us recently. Anything that we need to look at here? Seems to me the other day on a meeting, Paul, he had indicated he needed to make some changes.
That's what I heard. He got a bridge project that's supposed to start up in July, and I think he was wanting to get those expenditure and revenue. Those are all he's paying for all the. It's coming out of all of his budget, so he needed to get the expenditures into his highway and bridge maintenance number. So I suspect that his 2021 request of $3.14 million, what do you say, Mayor? There's going to be about $1 million for the bridge. So that number will jump up to 4.1 possibly.
But I think you also said that it was 100% funded by TDOT. So it may just may also change the revenue projection by the same amount.
That it would.
So, you know, the net impact may not be huge. Does anybody have any questions on the highway fund? It's probably we may be able to just move on. If he's going to make some changes, though, it probably makes more sense to consider this on the June the 5th, unless the committee would like to do something different with it.
So I think our next meeting will actually be the workshop. So on May 20, this number will stay where it is unless he brings us something different. And if he does, we will update that number for the workshop purposes.
Okay, good deal. All right.
If I could, does this reflect any that I assume that the highway department got the same letter the elected officials got with respect to the request to look at 5%?
He did not get that.
No, we were focused on the general fund when we were looking at that fund deficit. As his fund, he doesn't have the same issue in his fund that the general fund has in terms of projected fund balance. So it's a separate, it's part of, but yet separate.
Okay, well, let's get into this general fund if we can.
All right.
I just say that for the most part, the office holders were very engaging in terms of taking a look at their budget again and making reductions where they felt like they could. I did receive a letter from the sheriff's department where they didn't feel like they were able to cut, although we did make a few changes there with the chief's approval, and I think that he's gotten the sheriff up to speed on those, so there are some changes there. So generally, this is the overview, Mitch.
Yep. What this schedule presents to you is the first column of numbers is what the department initially requested. The second column of numbers is what we brought to you with the salary, with the 2% salary increase. As you know, all the departments did not budget in any salary increases. The third column is the numbers that have come back from the departments after your request for a 5% reduction. And then the last two columns are actually showing the changes from the original request and proposed, and then the change between the as adjusted number and the proposed number, i.e. what transpired as a result of the 5% reduction request. So you can see, which departments were able to make those changes. I will comment that the assessor's office, although it indicates zeros, departments 52,300 and 52,310, we received Mr. Buckingham's numbers yesterday evening, afternoon late. They're not incorporated into the budget number. I sent those to you guys this morning. Sorry, didn't think about sending them last night. And you can see what Mr. Buckingham's comments were there on his thoughts on reducing any of his budget. I don't want to specifically dwell on him without him being on here, but did want to point that out, that was a late arrival and had not been built into the numbers on your screen.
This, you just want to go ahead and share what those reductions were. So somebody wants to add them in here, they can.
For Scott's?
Yeah.
Well, I can pull them up or I can read them off to you. Outside of his, he's got about in the property assessor's office, his non-salary discretionary dollars, he's noted they total $16,950. It's what all of his other miscellaneous expenses are: postage, a little bit of travel, data processing, supplies, office supplies. That number is $16,950. 5% of his total budget, $17,272. So I think his point was that to reduce his budget 5%, he would just have to essentially eliminate all of his 300 and 400 category expenses, which would obviously mean that I don't know where you go to get pens and pencils, but I think that's what his message was. He did on his reappraisal number. He was able to make some changes there, and that is from the number you have here on the screen, 639, 691. He was able to reduce that by $40,000 by eliminating a vehicle, and he had $15,000, $25,000 for a vehicle went out, and $15,000 of office refurbishment costs came out, which I believe, Mayor, we were going to try to get that done with the courthouse renovation money.
Right.
So you can see where our officials and the mayor have, for those non-official lines, the rest of those changes came about, as a result of the mayor's efforts. And so you can kind of see where those numbers land. Our request, your request was to reduce, 5%, essentially, of a $43 million number. And you got 355,000. So it's a tough nut to crack, fellas.
A note from the sheriff's department. By the way, Lita mentioned that she was able to buy a SWAT vest for $43,000 instead of the $75,000 that was in there, and there was enough money in this year's budget to cover that. So there's already been a purchase order entered for them, so they can that amount can be removed from the sheriff's budget.
Okay.
Great job. Appreciate the help.
Is that that's the change? I noticed the sheriff's department line item on that schedule, it looks like none of the changes were in it. So that's the change for them.
That's an additional change to this.
Has not been, I'm just, that has not been factored into these numbers, Commissioner Wheeler.
But,
now I will, let me comment on that, because the vest, the SWAT vest, the intent there was to utilize some of the sheriff's reserve funds to pay for those. So if we're able to use his reserve funds for other things, it does make a positive impact on next year's budget in terms of eliminating $75,000 of expenditure, but we still have the $425,000 use of his reserve funds. That is a positive. If we reduce the use of his reserve funds to $350,000, then it's a zero sum effect on the budget, on the projected fund balance.
I guess my question is, in your final column under Sheriff's Department, there's a zero there.
Correct.
Where these other departments, there are numbers where they've made changes. I thought I understood that there have been changes made in the Sheriff's Department. And my question is, why is that number zero?
Well, the budget that they've submitted had they made no changes on their 5% request. I think subsequently, as the mayor alluded to, that Chief Lightning has been able to utilize money this year to acquire those SWAT vests, which is fine, but to the extent that we reduce the amount of reserve funds budgeted next year's use, it may have zero impact on your budget. I mean, there would be a $75,000 reduction in the last, a $75,000 negative number in the last column for those SWAT vests for the FY21 budget. But unless we're able to go ahead and utilize his reserve fund, 75,000 of his reserve funds for something else, then there isn't any net fund balance change. That's probably clear as mud, but. Mayor, am I missing something or?
No, I think that's exactly right, but I believe there will be something else that we can use those reserve funds for. We weren't taking his reserve account down to zero anyway. We're only using, it seems to me, the request was only to use about half of it that they had agreed to. And then, of course, that's not the drug fund. The drug fund is not being touched at all.
Correct. Yeah. This doesn't, and the drug fund actually hasn't come to you yet. It's money that the sheriff, is budgeting that he will collect and that he will spend in his drug eradication and enforcement operations. And those numbers are still pending coming from the sheriff's department. My hope is we do have them in time for the workshop, but we may not.
That reserve fund is a combination of various items, military surplus sales and other things that, accumulated to about $700,000. And I think the request utilization was what, 425, something like that.
Yes, sir. That's what we used to help offset the budget deficit.
Okay. Questions? Looking at the top level there. do you want to get into any of the detail of any of these individual departments, or do you want to move on to appropriations? What's the pleasure?
Well, let me share this real quick so that, I mean, this is kind of the top level of the general fund. Here, if you look here, version 2 is where we are after the officials have made their budget adjustments. You can see we're still tracking to be, almost $500,000, $400,000 under last year's revenue budget, which is going, as the mayor said earlier, is definitely going in the wrong direction. But, given the environment that we are currently faced economically, we think that's a prudent place to be. So you've had a chance to look at the revenues for the total year. Get on down to the total. We're looking at a $40.5 million revenue budget, which in total is 1.2 million less than the prior year. Now, I will need to point out that reflects the $900,000 of budget transfer from debt service in last year's budget. So, I mean, consider that a one-time item, and you pull that away from that 1.2 million, then you're really at, essentially about a $300,000 reduction. So those were the revenues. So we're budgeting $40.5 million of revenue, and our total departmental expend is budgeted at $43.388 million to give us a deficit of about 2.8.
Okay. Well, that makes everybody's day. Anyway, so still some work to do. Want to move on to the appropriations, Mitch, or is there anything we need to? Are there any questions or anything we need to cover on this before we move to the next item? Okay.
I'm looking for it. Hang on, Mayor. I'll have it up here in a second. I think I sent you all an appropriation listing, which actually I went ahead and dropped in a column for what a 5% reduction would be if we made it across the board on all of our agencies, which we can't do that because some of them are, as we've talked before, contractual obligations. There it is. Yep, okay. And keep in mind, I'm not advocating this. I'm just showing you what the numbers would look like. So,
one thing that we might point out I know we got some elected officials on the call, and probably maybe some others watching, is that we may have some questions, but we've only had this information since yesterday evening, and we probably gonna need some time to look it over to make.
Well, and I think that's, that's prudent. You needed to see it. You're going to have a workshop within a week, which will allow the full commission to look at the numbers and consider it. And so I think that would be, a week from today would probably be a good time to have those officials available if they need to be. But here's where we are on the special appropriations schedule. What we appropriated for FY20, the requests that we had from the various organizations for 21, what we came back to you a week or so ago with as the proposed, and then just for information purposes, the last column is there to just show what an overall 5% reduction would look like. I believe you should have, and you probably haven't had time to read through it, but you do have all of these the agencies. There were a couple that responded as to the impact of this reduction would have on their budgets. I've had a couple of phone calls, and as you can imagine, most of them, well, they all have said they can't use less money. So, they need the full appropriation that we appropriated at least last year. So,
but Mitch, just to point out the obvious, I guess, if I understood you a moment ago, the pie is smaller. We're budgeting a smaller pie in the coming fiscal year than in the current fiscal year, right?
Revenues are less. Yes, sir. Yep. They're not less.
So
by 5%,
even if somebody gets budgeted this, so even if somebody gets budgeted the same amount as last year or the current fiscal year, their piece of the pie is getting larger.
True. Yeah, I haven't thought about that concept, Commissioner Malone, but yeah, I mean, if you were to take and if we were to look at, oh shoot, where'd it go? Boom, boom, boom. Sorry, I'm scrolling around back here behind the scenes. If we were to take our revenue change from last year and essentially take out the fund balance transfer from debt service, if we were to look at what was our budgeted revenue last year without that, it being would be $40.8 million when you take out the $900,000, and compared to a $40.5 million revenue budget, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1%, or maybe less if my mental math is getting close. So that point is the pie hadn't shrunk by 5%. The pie's shrunk by about 1% or a little less. So.
But as Mr. Held said, relative to the school board's budget, those transfers aren't necessarily a reoccurring items. They may help you in any given year, but it's not something that can continue indefinitely.
That's correct. Yep.
And when you take out that transfer, that does increase that percentage a little bit, right?
Yeah, I would have done the exact opposite of what you did. And
okay.
Is that how you came up with the 5% that we used last time?
No, 5% was just because that was the number that you used for your officials.
But we came up with that number last time when we met, or not last time we met, but the time when we made the decision to ask them to cut 5%. I thought that was based on when you factor out the using any of the what will be left of the reserves. That
Yes, you're correct. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. I mean, that was what it would take to, if expenses were reduced in total by 5%, then you would eliminate your budget deficit.
right. And we don't have 900,000 in unencumbered reserves to transfer next year without changing our policy on our reserves, correct?
Are you talking about transferring from debt service?
No transfer. Well,
I'm not. I mean, that's what we did this year is we transferred $900,000 from debt service to the general fund to fill the gap.
and that kept us from having to change the policy about how much we keep in reserve.
That's right.
Kept it, yeah, true, right.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. If we went forward and tried to keep it to only reducing the pie by 1% and looked at doing that again, we would have to change our policy and reduce the amount we keep as a security blanket. That's not a good way to put that, but that we have, we've got to keep something in reserve. We have set that amount, and the only way we could do it again next year right now would be to reduce the amount we're keeping held back for per the policy.
Are you talking about dipping into the general fund reserve?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that would be true. Yeah.
So without that, we are looking at more of a reduction of the pie is closer to 5% if you look at it that way without dipping into the reserve.
That would be correct.
I want to make sure that people understand why we've looked at 5% and that we are talking about a roughly 5% change in the size. So there's somebody's asking to keep exactly what they had last year. That means somebody else has got to cut more than 5% to make up for that if we stay within our current means.
Yeah, and when you consider the ask of a 5% reduction for a department like the sheriff, for example, who makes up roughly half of a general fund, I mean that's like $1 million, and so there's really no way to do that in his department without impacting salaries, which impacts deputies and service and ability to. So in some cases it's difficult. Scott Buckingham, I think, indicated in his department that he had very little space after salaries. And so to get that in his department, he would have to reduce staff. I think the same would apply to the court clerk's budget. She has a lot of people in her organization over there, as you know, and so the vast majority of that budget is salaries. One of the things we started with was an increase to our salary lines in all departments. So, but the answer to your question is, I mean, if you could take 5% across the board out of every line, you could get to a point where you can close the gap. So that's what we asked, and I think the departments came back and made cuts where they felt like they could. In some cases, it was just, just without cutting their people or without impacting service in a significant way. They didn't get to the 5%.
How many of the departments weren't able to cut anything in their response?
I think every department reduced some.
Okay.
And some got to 5%. I mean, we looked at, for example, the combination of environmental court, planning and zoning and codes enforcement. You take the combination of those, they got 5% out. One department or the other may not have quite hit it, but that combination, that was sort of my goal when I was working with them, was to look at those as a group, 7 people down there, doing various things. But at the end of the day, there's still this gap. And one of the things that is in the material that was recently provided, and I think we referenced it earlier, was information from the comptroller's office that didn't really recommend. They said, 1, that we would do the budget on time, 2, that we would be conservative in our estimates on the revenue side based on the uncertainty of the economy and as a result of the COVID-19 situation, which we'd already planned to do. They produced webinars and that sort of thing to attend. Anyway, I think the revenues are conservative, but still there's still some question mark out there. We did get the sales tax numbers for March. They are down, as just about everybody expected. So waiting, April will be the real tail on that, probably.
Mayor, if I may, a follow-up question. From our commission meeting Monday night, one of the commissioners, and I'm asking for education, but one of our commissioners kind of spoke as if we don't pass the budget by the end of June, it's no big deal, and that the county had gone, I think it was said as late as perhaps November in the past, but certainly as I see the memo from the comptroller's office, it doesn't seem to say that. Educate me about the timing, and I mean, is the county required and supposed to have a budget done by the end of the fiscal year, June 30?
They are, and I think that letter is pretty clear that particularly this year, the expectation is that be accomplished, and that so the answer to your question specifically is if a budget for whatever reason is not approved by the end of June, then as we move forward into the next fiscal year, in order to have money to spend, the categories populate as if it was last year's budget.
Yeah, the commission actually has to pass a continuing resolution,
okay,
which they can do for 2 months. If you don't adopt the budget by the end of August, then you run the risk of your BEP funds being withheld.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, may I add from a legal perspective that the county also has several grants recently approved by this commission that will require Washington County to demonstrate by a date after June 30th that it has passed its budget, or that state funding would not be available. Those were specific to economic development at the industrial park, just for this committee to think about contractual obligations. I know that was an interest at the last meeting.
Yeah, pretty much any grant funding that we would request from the state would be withheld until the budget is adopted. Having gone through budget process for a lot of years, as probably most of y'all have as well, they don't get better by waiting. I mean, the numbers are what they are, the facts are what they are, and you make your assumptions and do what you need to do to manage the budget. There's no real gain in doing it in some other month in the future. It's not going to change it.
Mayor Grandy.
Who's that?
Mayor, this is Brad. Could I add something? Can I add something about the BEP funding? I heard that mentioned that could be cut off. get everyone to realize the BEP funding accounts for over 50% of the funding for the schools. So if the BEP funding were worst case scenario to be cut off, you're talking about within a very short time us not being able to meet payroll. So that's pretty serious to the school system.
Yeah, and full disclosure, in case you guys didn't know, I work for a bank and I'm a lender, so I often think about things from a lending or a financial perspective. And I think doing the budget late doesn't send a good message to the bond rating agencies. But I was just following up on the comment from Monday night from one of the commissioners and just wanted to better understand the timing of the budget. So it sounds like it is pretty important and pretty serious to have it done by June 30.
It is, and there were years in the past it was probably later than that, but really over the last 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, we put the budget together and had it approved on time. It is serious to not get there. I mean, the comptroller's office takes who is performing our audit. They're here today working on it. They take it very seriously if we miss that date. So we are, our schedule is built to continue to work on this budget, these issues, trying to continue to reduce expenses where we can. In our proposed budget, I don't believe we're going to find a new money tree out there to shake the leaves off of. Mitch usually does pretty well with that, but I think our revenue projections are pretty much where they're going to be, and so we continue to whittle away at the expense side, and then figure out how to close that gap. All right, so speaking of whittling away expenses, here's a projection of what a 5% reduction would look like across the board in appropriations. We talked about these. We talked about these at our last budget meeting. I think the recommendation was to leave, say, volunteer fire where it was, but as you can see, Finance Director Meredith has put together this information that shows what it would look like if we took 5% out of all of these lines. I will say that in your information, you have response back from EMS and 911 as to what cuts to their budget would do to their system. And I think with both of those, since they both receive funds from the state and we share the cost with the city of Johnson City, the expectation if the county's portion is reduced, then those other portions are reduced. So in some cases, it may be a 2 or 3 time impact on their organizations. I think some of that's referenced in their information to you. They were kind enough to put together a letter as to what the impact would
be. And as you can see, when you get down to the bottom, you're looking at what, a $220,000 decrease,
right?
Which would take your estimated deficit from 2.6 million to 2.4 million. So while while it is a reduction, it's a very small piece of the big picture. And so, you know, how we're going to deal with that full $2.6 million deficit, I think it's what, you know, to get to a point that you know, it may be the full commission workshop, you know, that comes up with the direction, but that's what we've got to deal with. And so, you know, I would encourage you to, you know, to be focusing on what you think is the best policy and procedure for taking care of that $2.6 million deficit. You know, there's a lot of $5,000 adjustments. There's, you know, as we can see, just saw from the special appropriations, you can save $200,000, but when it's all said and done, you're still going to have a $2 million hole you got to try to fill somehow. I know that's news that you want, but you are going to have to come up with a plan B.
One of the emails you sent out, I think you indicated there was a plan B, but I'm not putting my finger on where you've done something with a plan B.
Well, you know, you have, and I'll tell you, I can find it and pull it up, but you have 3 ways, or a combination of 3 ways of resolving this deficit. One is an expense reduction. Okay. And I think the mayor's made an extremely large effort to make that happen. And in my 10 years of you know, watching the commission, I think that this is a year that's been about as tight as it could be. So you have, you know, the first, you know, an expense reduction. I think we see that that's not going to solve the problem.
It's closer.
It gets you closer, but it doesn't, you know, I mean, you're still you're going to be $2+ million out. You know, I don't know where we're going to get rid of, because the number that's on your, the number that was on the screen a minute ago was, you know, with the reductions that the departments had made already. So we're at 2.6. A transfer of funds. Let me put this schedule back up for you. I'm looking at one thing, and you need to see it too. You know, a reduction of funds. The other thing is, you know, a transfer of funds from debt service. And actually, you can't transfer the fund balance. What you're doing is transferring a portion of the current year revenue. This was driven home to me a couple of weeks ago by our auditors and some folks with CTAS. And I want to share it with you all because you are the budget committee and you need to understand it. We made that $900,000 transfer last year from debt service to general fund to help fill the gap. Well, technically, we made that transfer from non-property tax pennies that were generated in debt service in FY20. Okay. The way the comptroller looks at this is that once the year closes, that fund balance is then restricted for that use, i.e. debt service or highway or solid waste. And you can't move that fund balance. All you can move is the revenue that's non-property tax pennies. And so that's what essentially we did with the $900,000 transfer. Let me grab something else. I know I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but let me get back to I want to bring up our debt service reserve projection for a quick minute. I'm about there. Hang on. Okay. This next screen is our current debt service projection. And as you'll see, we are projecting to have available above our debt service, our fund balance limit, $1.6 million at the end of FY21. Okay. Or let me back up. Let me put it this way. We've got $1.069 million available at the end of FY20. We can't move $1,069,000 to debt service. I mean, to general fund at the end of 20. That number is going to become locked in and it's going to be restricted. What we can move is $1.9 million of other revenue in FY21 from debt service to the general fund. Now, moving the full $1.9 million would obviously put you $300,000 below your fund balance, but you could move $1.6 million, and you're doing that from other revenues, not from your property tax and not from your fund balance. That makes sense? I mean, it's kind of a technical piece, but I wanted to, you know, if you got down to 2025 and you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, I've got $7.5 million I can move in that year. No, you can't. You can only move $2 million, which is the amount of the other revenue. Because once the year ends, those funds are restricted for that particular purpose. And they're restricted. They're not committed or assigned, and you can't change them. So anyway, that's any comments, questions on that issue? Might not like the answer, but that's what the comptroller's position is.
So that's 2 of the 3.
And then the third is new revenue. New revenues could come about through a variety of, you could actually generate totally new revenue sources, which has been tried. I don't think that you want to go there. Things like wheel tax. You could do some things with, we're not fully maxed out on our sales tax. You could max that out and keep the county's second half for county operations. I don't know that would be a big enough number to do anything with. And then the other is just an increase in your property tax rate for the general fund. So, I think it may take a combination of at least 2 of those things to make this thing work this year. Because, and find that, started the year off, spending $1 million more than we are projected to collect. And we're going to, as we continue to do that, it's just like the same conversation we were having with the schools earlier. That's going to catch up. I mean, it's going to come home to roost in, a couple of years. And so the question is, when do you look at making a property tax rate change? If you don't do it this year, you probably don't have really a whole lot of choice. I mean, you see how hard this is right now. How hard is it going to be when you add another year and another inflationary piece onto it? Unless you go back and there's some significant service that you want to eliminate. I don't know. It's a hard, You know, I've told y'all this before. You all are in a really tough spot. I mean, it's a difficult decision.
So these are the things, though, I think we need to share with the full commission in the workshop for, consideration and, just to get them up to speed. We have worked on the expense reduction side fairly diligently over the last 8 weeks to get where we are. So we need to take a look and see how people feel about these options, I guess, for revenue change. Last year, we equalized the tax rate on the reappraisal year slightly below what we believe the assessed value equalization rate was going to be. After the Board of Equalization finished their work, reducing it further, we actually were about a half a penny below what the full equalized rate would have been if we'd have taken it out to the second decimal point. So we wound up, just in real terms, we wound up collecting less property tax revenue last year than we did the prior year, about 0.5%, just based on that, one decision. So, or one event, I guess, really wasn't much of a decision. It was an event. So, a lot of things to consider. Not an easy solution, but it is what it is. And to Commissioner Malone's point earlier, it ain't going to change in 2 months. It's going to be the same. It's just going to be 2 months later.
Well, and I think perhaps some direction from the full commission would be helpful. But, philosophically, times like these happen, they occur. We don't want them. It's not something we look forward to, but they happen. And obviously we have to work through them. But, in my mind, it's times like these that help each of us operate a little more efficiently. And I think that should be true both of us individually in terms of our household budgets. Businesses, certainly, I think through this, we've seen businesses come up with unique ways to either control expenses or to generate revenue. So I don't think it should be exclusive to either households or businesses. I think the concept of working more efficiently, should apply to government as well. And am I implying that maybe our government is not operating as efficiently as it could? I suppose so. But I guess at the moment I'm not eager to talk about a tax increase.
No one is, and that's hard. That's the hard part. One of the things that we in this government deal with is, in business, when you need to cut expense, you're almost always looking at payroll, because in business, like in our county government, probably 80% of our expense and cost is wrapped up in our people. In government, however, we don't have the ability to say do a RIF, even if that were the decision, because each of the elected office holders has the ability to control their team of people. And I don't have the ability, other than a few of the staff that are on this floor, to go to one of these office holders and say, hey, you have to do this with 2 less people next year or whatever the situation is. There's just not a lot of flexibility. We're a constitutional government, and these elected officials are answer only to the citizens, just like we do. So, significant cuts beyond what the office holders are willing to do are really hard to institute. I'm looking for direction, over the next week. I can go back and we can continue to work on the expense reduction side. But as Director of Finance Meredith pointed out a few minutes ago, we're really working on the gnats and not the elephants. So anyway, does anybody have any thoughts, comments, or direction for me specifically to work on other things?
This may be more to Director Meredith, but I'd like us to look at, if you could get this information to us, the percentage that each department has proposed to cut. Along with that, any new money that they are that after those cuts they would be continuing to ask for this year.
Say that last part again.
Yeah, if they have, after they have, the proposed cuts have been taken into account, are they asking for any new money for their department this year?
Yeah. Okay. Which we know they are. Okay. Yeah, I can get that summarized for you. Yeah. I will say, Commissioner Wheeler, when I said there's 3 approaches, I guess really there's 4. The 4th one, and you've alluded to it before, is a change in your fund balance policy. Because that's where we're driving to. So, whether that's long-term financially prudent, probably not, but that is a 4th alternative. There are entities that have fund balance policies that require less than Washington County does, but they're probably not AA2 rated either. So.
Right. That's one of those things that if you do that for reoccurring expenses too, you've got a problem down the road.
Yep. You're going to be right back at it next year.
Yeah, and that really goes exactly to the comments I made with respect to the school board's approach. It's not a sustainable model. I mean, you can face where we are today, this year. You might push it down the road one more year. But at the end of the day, you just flat can't spend more money than your revenue indefinitely. So we do have a rainy day fund, and we do have a general fund reserve policy that was designed to support our bond rating. And there's, there is money available there. But it's, so is this the rainy day? You'd have to conclude if you say that the economy is going to be significantly different in 12 months and that our general revenue is going to be substantially different in 12 months. We've been talking about this probably for the last 4 or 5 years, ever since the recession that started in 2008 and 9, and where this region and Washington County has never really economically bounced back. So our growth, while it was creeping up to 1%, we were still moving backwards with respect to inflation and salary increases and the other things that were going on in the county. This is not new. it's a continuation. And of course, you know, the coronavirus situation has made it a lot more difficult. They're probably a lot more questionable.
Hey, Mayor, this is Larry. I'm
Larry.
going to have to jump off. I just wanted to make a comment that, you know, as many rainy days as we've had and more yet to come, that rainy day may be something we have to look at, because I, for one, am not in favor of any kind of a tax increase to offset this deficit we're looking at. So, you know, we may have to get a little more creative. But I did have one question for you. I've had some folks ask me when we expect county offices to open back up.
Right. So we had a meeting with the elected officials yesterday, and current projection is June the 1st. So
Okay,
in terms of traffic into the building, as you know, all of the essential functions of government have continued all along.
Yeah. And I know that in our buildings that, you know, in all the retail spots you go in now, they've got the plexiglass up, and seems like in most of our buildings, we already have a glass barrier between the employees and the public.
We've spent some time installing the sneeze guard, that sort of thing, and we will be temperature checking people coming in the building after the building's open.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, I look forward to our meeting on the 28th.
Good.
Mayor, related to that, I had one thing that I'd like you to check on, and Ms. Wilkinson may need to address this a little bit too. I had clients this week that were having trouble transferring title to a vehicle to private parties. And they were told that they would not be able to do that until the courthouse opened back up by the clerk's office. So I called and spoke to the clerk myself and was basically told the same thing. I was told that the governor had extended things out, they could drive that vehicle. And I had raised the issue of insurance. And I pointed out that was not correct. There was no insurance coverage on that vehicle. I was a little concerned that the advice I'd been given was that it was coverage. That could potentially come back on the county, I'm afraid, if we tell people that. But if you could just check on that to make sure that one, that may be an area where we are not able to provide service right now that we may not have been aware of. And then two, that we're making sure we give correct advice with respect to, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with the registration at all, which would be extended, but this is the title being transferred to somebody else in the family, and therefore there would have been no coverage on that vehicle if they'd driven it. And they're not driving it. We took care of that. But.
Right. So title transfers that are being sent in by mail are processed and sent back out immediately. And if it is more urgent than several days worth of mail traffic, if they can call the clerk and give them the information about the transfer, they can get the exactly what the cost would be, whether it's sales tax or registration or whatever. They can bring the check in with that amount. We will pass it through to the clerk, and they can process it while they wait if that's a need.
Well, and the clerk got it straightened out that it could be mailed in, but a deputy clerk had told them they couldn't transfer it till they came back, till the office opened back up. So
right. So we have been doing those transfers all along, and apologize for that misinformation creating confusion.
But and certainly understandable in this uncertain time. So,
well, it's you know, it's just people, and they work hard and they do a good job, but sometimes information gets crossways. And again, apologize for that. That was not the intent. They're processing new vehicle registrations, and new vehicle sales actually have been pretty good through this that's one segment that's been pretty active through this whole virus deal. That was straightened out, and is there anything I need to do specifically for that individual, Mr. Wheeler?
No, that respect to the individual is fine. I think it might help if Ms. Wilkinson talked to them a little bit about the liability insurance issues, so they all understand down there about giving advice on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. I've made a note of that, and I'll also just remind them which ones were extended so that they can make that distinction and be sure to offer those services clearly. It sounds like it's been corrected through the experience that they've had, but I'll certainly visit with them. I know that Kathy Story would want to be sure she's complying with the law. Thank you for noticing it.
Thank you.
Okay. So how if there's no additional work to do on this budget at the moment, how would you like to present in the workshop? Where would you like to? I thought, one of the things we probably needed to cover with them, even though we have gone over it a lot of times in the committee, is talk a little bit about the capital project component, because that's really a big piece, and you all have sort of already braced that moving forward, but at least just share it with everybody. Would that be a place to start for y'all?
I think that's okay. I think in terms of the beginning, perhaps the area to start is kind of the summary, the big picture that Director Meredith referenced is, here's your options, and kind of lay out the three options and get direction perhaps from more commissioners about which direction they prefer.
I think that's where we should start, or do you think there's some background we need to develop before that? We'll do it any way you want to do it.
I think that they might need to hear those are the three options they're going to be looking at, and hear before there's discussion about that, then hear the background, because they need to know as they're listening to that background that that's what they're facing. Maybe most of them will know that from either watching this or hearing about this meeting. They need to know that that's what they're listening for as they talk, as they hear the detail about the expense reduction to this point, and then making decisions about whether they're going to ask for more of that or what they're going to ask for.
Okay. That's the way we'll approach it then. Other comments or direction for us between now and the 28th?
I think it'd be nice if we went around, if we they won't need to vote on anything at that, but there ought to be some indication from each commissioner what their preferences are on those three, really four options. The fourth one being a combination of the first three.
All right.
Commissioner Wheeler, I see the workshop purpose as being twofold, in that it allows the rest of your fellow commissioners to understand where we are financially, where we're projected to go. And secondly, it gives you the opportunity for input from them as to where that direction is, because you will have to come back and make a proposal back to the full commission, for budget adoption.
And the time frame on that's so tight.
It is.
That we need that feedback in this first budget workshop. Which, if they change direction on the 28th, we don't have much time to do it. of June, if of June, I'm saying.
Right.
They wait till the end of June to let us know that, no, we don't want to go that direction. We want to go this direction. That's going to be difficult to deal with.
And I'm going to share a real quick little story with you. If we wait until, the end of June, and I don't mean the 22nd, but if we went to like June the 28th or 29th or 30th to adopt the budget, I'm going to have a mutiny on my hands over an accounts and budget, because here's why. Because Jason Mumpower throws a pizza party for every county that has their budget submitted, not approved, but submitted by June 30th. So I've got girls that are looking for pizza, early next year, because we're going to have this thing submitted to the comptroller by July 1. And it does take some work after it's approved to get it into their schedules and their formats that they need. So anyway, yeah, we are on to be done before July 1.
So we've built into the schedule 2 workshops. And I guess it is conceivable that, we'll just sort of see how the 28th goes. If we get direction where this committee can come back together and pull a proposal that we believe will be, respectful of the wishes of the full commission, then great, we can do that. If not, we have, I think, June the 2nd as a date for, another opportunity for the full commission to come together and, again, give us some additional direction, with the goal of having a budget to publish on June 9th. So, right, short time frame. Admittedly, the work is hard. It doesn't get easier by stretching it out. I'll just say that. This is sort of where we bear down and just get it done. Whatever the solutions are. So I think now, you've got all the detailed information. You've got all the summary information. Have any, thoughts or ideas, or particularly if you want to see any of this presented in a different way, or whatever you want, and if you can let us know, we'll put it in gear and be prepared on the 28th to present your wishes to the workshop.
One thing I would ask is that we get the information, the written information, out to the commissioners in time for them to have looked at it before the meeting, because if not, we're just, we're not going to get a good result as far as feedback.
Okay, so would that include some information on, options for the solutions?
I think so, but I also think they need to see the detail where we are with the budget right now, and where particularly where the cuts have been made and that type thing. If they're going to consider whether they think we've looked at the cuts enough at this point, they need to be able to see what's been done.
Okay. All right. I think I hear what you're saying. So all right. We'll work on this today and tomorrow, and you think we can get that information out on Tuesday to the full commission on the 20th, by the sometime on the 26th?
Yeah, I've got a text just a little earlier from Chief Layton, and if we can get, I believe you may have seen it too, Mayor. She's working on some more budget reductions. If we could get that, by tomorrow, then yeah, if it comes in late on Monday, the answer is it won't be in whatever goes out on Tuesday.
Well, yeah, we're probably not here Monday, although we might be here Monday. So anyway.
So yeah, I forgot Monday was a holiday actually. So yeah, We definitely got it. I mean, it's holiday for some, but we definitely got to get it in here tomorrow then.
But I think, really, if we could just get a bottom line reduction, all the detailed stuff we could take later, because what we're really looking at, based on Commissioner Wheeler's request was, is summary stuff, and what we're looking at is what is where the gap is and what it's going to take to close the gap. So I think we can work with that. Okay. Anything else for this morning? From anybody? Any last minute thoughts? Okay. Well, with that being said, I don't think there's any other business to come before the group other than to, knuckle down and pull all this together. So, thank you very much, and we will adjourn this budget meeting.